So I've had a lot of conversations about what Trump's policies impact might be on single family housing, but I've yet to have a meaningful discussion about Trump's potential impact on multifamily. So we're going to have this conversation with the one and only Jonathan Twombly. How you doing, Jonathan?
I'm doing great, Michael. Good to see you.
Yes, this should be a fun conversation. Again, it's going to be one of those things that we could kind of take in both directions, good and bad, because A, we do not know the policies that will be enacted. We only can deal with what we were told during the campaign, and we don't know when they're going to be involved, how they're going to be rolled out. So lots of variables, which means this is all going to be a complete guess. You ready for this?
Sure. Suck it.
So let's go with immigration first, right? It is very clear that there is going to be a concerted effort to deport illegal immigrations. I think the question starts with, where do they start? I think the criminals is a layup, right? Whatever the number is. I've seen numbers as high as 40,000, tier one criminals, murders, rapists, things of that nature. My suspicion is that's where they're going to start and be aggressive. When I think about that initial starting point in multifamily, that's probably not enough to really impact anything. Is that reasonable to think about?
40,000 people out of a country of 330 million is like statistical noise. It's completely irrelevant.
Perfect.
I mean, the real issue with that policy is probably their home countries won't take them. So then what do? Either you put them in prison or you put them in a different thing that's a prison somewhere else. So
that's not going to be my problem to figure out. I'll let the smart people in government figure it out. But the idea is these people will be gone. Again, it's statistical noise impact on housing, multifamily, probably even the labor market, to your point, right? 40,000 is
no impact at all.
No impact at all. So let's take this immigration to a level, like how bad or how big or how quick would it have to be for it to be statistically relevant? Are we talking about 1 million people inside of a calendar year? Is it 2 million people? When does it kind of get your attention, you think?
I mean, that's a tough question. I think rather than the numbers themselves, I think it's going to be like the atmosphere that's created, right? So if this turns out to be like a real thing as opposed to just campaign, rhetoric, then I think you could see a fairly large impact in a couple of ways. I mean, first of all, I mean, a lot of different things will happen. I think anybody who's got like a shot at becoming legitimate, like they're married, but they just never filed their paper, they're married to a U.S. citizen, I think so. You'll see a lot of people rushing to file whatever they need to file, right?
The appropriate paperwork.
Yeah. But then I think you'll also see a lot of people who may just leave voluntarily, right? And certainly I think it'll have it already is having a chilling effect on inbound immigration, right? We had a massive surge over the last few years. That looks like it's pretty much, that surge is over. So I think the impact goes two ways, right? Let's just say, I don't know what the number is, but let's just say whatever the number is, we get to that number, right? That starts to have an impact. So on the one hand, you'll have less pressure on housing, right?
Yeah.
Because you'll have less demand for housing, obviously from those people.
Yeah.
On
less
the other
bodies,
hand, less bodies, less demand for housing, right? It's pretty straightforward. Right. On the other hand, though, I think that you'll have, so like that seems like, hey, great, less pressure on housing prices will moderate, whatever. However, on the other side of this, I mean, basically like some extraordinary proportion of the people who actually are involved in building housing are immigrants, legal or illegal, right? And the entire housing industry is dependent on these people, and the government has never really gotten its act together to say, you know what, the industry is dependent on these people, so let's create a legal way for them to work. So if this is just going to be like, hey, let's kick them all out and make their lives really unpleasant so they leave, without creating any kind of pathway for people to, become legally employed here, then that is going to take a situation that's already bad in terms of new construction and make it even worse, because
Yep.
you can't build housing without the people to build it. And the people who build it they're immigrants because they are willing to, put up with these difficult working conditions and lower wages that native born people don't have to put up with, right? And wouldn't put up with. So, because they have more options, right? So, it will really impact the construction industry.
So let's talk about that.
Way. Yeah.
Let's talk about that in twofold, because I've thought a lot about this, because I knew this topic was going to be one that you and I discussed. So we'll start on the demand side, and then we'll go to the labor side. When I think about demand for housing, right, shelter, right, let's call it what it is, shelter. My impression, again, I have no statistical evidence on this, but my guess is a lot of those folks, a lot being, let's call it 90% or more, are renters versus homeowners.
Yeah.
Does that feel reasonable to think?
Yeah, I agree with that. And they're renters, and then depending on sort of what their family status is, they may be doubling up, tripling up, quadrupling up, right? So,
exactly.
So I really have no way of knowing like what their actual impact on demand is. We know that there is some impact on demand, just don't know what it is.
The other thing when I think about this, because that's kind of how I broke it down, and then I think about the comment, the U.S. is 320 million, folks living here. But when I think about, I'm going to call it a million because it's a big number, about 1 million people being deported. And again, I have no idea if that's coming. It's just a number that jumps out as me as big. I think what we would see is a disproportionate amount of that million coming from a few states. Because it's not like the million will be evenly distributed by all over 50 states. It'll probably be a million, probably 80 to 90% of the million will come from 10 states, 12 states. And then when you start breaking that, 320 million down to 12 states, you very quickly get to, I don't know, 100 million. I don't know, but it's just how I logically get there. And I'm like, wow, if you start taking 1% of the renters out of a market, and again, let's be clear, the markets that probably have this immigration problem also have the most supply coming, right? The Sun Belt.
Right.
I mean, that could be a double dip on demand. So I think demand, if this was quick and big, could really impact rental demand for multifamily in the Sun Belt, to kind of put a pin.
But let's also talk about sort of where the demand is, though, because if you're talking about people who either are undocumented or they're documented, but they have like their casual labor, or they're working at the low end of the economic spectrum. They're not in professionally managed apartment buildings.
No, they're not in Class A, to your point.
Not only they're not in Class A, they're not in Class C if that Class C is professionally managed.
That's a good point.
Because they don't have the pay stubs, they don't have the regular income to meet the screening criteria, right, that you're typically have in place. So they're going to be disproportionately in like mom and pop kinds of rentals.
Good call.
Right?
Good call.
Probably a lot of those owners are themselves immigrants as well, right? Because they're comfortable renting to people who speak their language, what have you, right? So I think the impact of this will be disproportionately felt by small landlords.
Love that. I think that's a great insight. Makes sense. That's a great insight. So now let's go to the other side, because this is something I've definitely got to, again, using the million number just because it's big and scary. If you take 1 million workers, labor, out of the construction industry, all the way from constructing new stuff to remodeling to general maintenance, that has to be inflationary. It just has to be.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, not only is it it's inflationary in the sense that if you take people out, then you have to offer more.
Yeah, the work needs to get done.
Right. But I think there's also just a lot of the work not getting done. Right. So that's deflation. That's deflationary. Right. I mean, it's like,
well, it depends if it's demand delayed or demand destroyed, because I would argue it's demand delayed.
Well, it's supply destroyed, right? It's actually supply destroyed, right, on the housing side, or at least severely delayed, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be inflationary. But I mean, if the project never happens at all, yeah, it's inflationary for rents ultimately, right? I was thinking
Right.
on the labor side, because it's potentially inflationary on both ends of this,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because you've got higher costs, higher wages, and you've got less supply, and
Double pain.
yeah. So, and let's talk about, I looked into this recently, and I don't, don't quote me on this because I may be getting this wrong, but at least from what I recall reading, at least 40% of the construction labor force is immigrant labor, right? And immigrant labor
I had no
meaning
idea.
not U.S. citizens. So probably more than that is people who are also now naturalized citizens or what have you, right? But something like 40% of the labor in the construction industry is immigrant labor. And so I expect, I mean, honestly, given that Trump is a real estate guy, right? And a lot of real estate people have his ear, you would think. I just can't imagine there not being some kind of carve out for the construction industry, right? Because the industry would collapse. I mean, like, I don't know, for example, how, like, the renovation work that we do in our projects, it's 100% immigrant labor. There are no like Americans doing that work, right? So, I mean, when I say Americans, that's the wrong statement. Like, some of these guys may be naturalized citizens. I don't know, but they, they're all immigrants, right? In one shape or another. And I think that's just common across the board. I mean, if you walk down the street in New York City and you see who's on a construction site, right? It's not guys who look like you and me, right? So that's going to have a big impact.
Cool. Well, let's switch to the other big topic of the campaign, and that is tariffs. Again, I don't do big projects like yourself. I don't do new construction. I'm just occasionally flip stuff and just a buy and hold guy. But when I think about all the stuff that goes into my properties, a lot of that stuff is imported from overseas, right? We don't make a lot of kind of home construction.
Like 90% of it. I mean, almost all of it, right? Like, we're not making tile and, PVC pipe and like all of those low value products, right?
Low value, but critical.
Low value, but right. Exactly. There's, or I should say low value add, right? There's no, there's no, like, massive IP going into these products that transforms, some silicon into like a chip that's worth $1,000, right? This is all like really basic stuff. So we're talking about drywall. We're talking about
just lumber,
tile,
and 2x4,
flooring.
roofing.
Yeah, I mean, lumber we make here, right? But that's about it. But all the other stuff, just think about what you use to build a house, right? Copper wiring, right? Where is that made? It's made in China, right? Tile, flooring, roofing materials, drywall, windows. Maybe we make them here. I'm not sure, but maybe we make
Pella windows. I know is in Iowa.
Yeah.
I think.
So it's like, but I'm sure a lot of the components of that stuff are coming from overseas. So if you're going to go and slap, 60% tariffs or 100% tariffs, that is going to be massively inflationary, and it'll just make a lot of projects not pencil out. I mean, and even like the last time around, I remember actually being in line at a deli and waiting to buy lunch, and the guy in front of me was complaining to the people behind the counter at the deli about how the price of pipe had just gone up by like 50% when Trump came. This is 2017, right? And he bid the project like years before, and now he was out of luck because his pipe cost went up dramatically. And you're going to see that happening again. And this is why you're actually seeing a lot of people who are in the position to do it, like laying in supplies ahead of time to get ahead of the tariffs, right? So it's going to be interesting.
There's a lot of potential inflationary pressure.
So again, which is why I'm a little bit skeptical about this really happening. Like, I kind of feel like this is a lot of like campaign rhetoric or kind of like posturing ahead of negotiations, which will wind up, just like that whole redo of NAFTA, which was like basically just rearranging deck chairs, right? And didn't, was claimed a big victory, but didn't actually change much of anything. I suspect that we'll see something like that again. Mostly this is about like jawboning. I just can't imagine, again, like with the people that, Trump is aligned with and seems to care about, which are, the big business, basically, they're the ones who are going to be telling him like, this is crazy, don't do it. So there'll be some kind of like face saving thing that makes it look like there are some tariffs, but I just can't imagine like 60% tariffs, on
building
or 100%
supplies.
China. Yeah. I mean, it just would grind the industry to a halt, especially combined with the labor thing. So I just don't see this happening.
Well, we'll do one more thing on tariffs, and then I do have one more topic again that's been discussed under Trump that probably, I think, actually of the three looks very likely. We'll talk about that one in a minute. But the last thing about tariffs is, again, they're a strategic tool, and they are a strategic tool that I think needs to be wielded in some very focused areas. Think of a scalpel versus a shotgun. And these strategic areas are things that we should deem as national security. And the things that come to mind for me, pharmaceuticals, personal protection products and things of that nature. But when I think about home construction, I cannot think of anything that we should make because it's, it goes to that level. But I thought I'd ask you because maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that rises to that level. And I just don't see how, given like US labor costs, any of that stuff could be produced in a competitive way in the United States, unless, the process was extremely automated, in which case it doesn't create a lot of jobs anyway, right? If the whole point of this is to like bring jobs back to the US, I don't see how the US because let's kind of like talk about what we're talking about here. If you're, even if you're paying, let's say you're paying factory workers minimum wage, which you're not, but let's just say you're paying a minimum wage, right?
Yeah.
Your labor costs, which are just like probably the biggest component of your cost of producing anything. Yeah. Your minimum wage here, call it $17, right? In China, what is it? $1, 50 cents, right? Like you can't, there's just no way that you can have your labor costs be thousands of percentages higher and be competitive. Yeah. So you basically have to get rid of the labor to do it. You have to just massively automate it. Yeah. And so let's
talk about one final topic, because we've got about 10 minutes left together. I want to talk about deregulation. I think one of the things that is certainly going to come out of the Trump administration, I don't know if it'll be day one, but it'll be year one, is really a focus on deregulation. And again, as a federal government, they can't mandate states and locals, but they can certainly incentivize, right? They can use carrots and sticks to incentivize behavior. So I suspect there will be a large focus on building entry-level housing. Because again, one of the things that I believe is the only way to quote unquote fix the broken housing market is to have a focused and concerted effort on building entry-level homes like the 60s and 70s. We've got away from that with profit only being had with McMansions. So do you see any deregulation that would be a net positive, encourage new projects, encourage more building? Is that possible?
Yeah, but I mean, it would have to be like fairly. So the federal government, as you point out, cannot make the state. It can't just say, change your laws and do this, right? Right. So the only way that the only power it has is to tie those things to funding, and the funding has to be like, they can't say, oh, like we're going to cut off all your highway funds if you don't build housing or something. So it's got to be like fairly narrowly, like it's got to be related somehow. So if there is some kind of like federal subsidies that are for housing, they could tie it to that. Right. Or they could create a new program to say, hey, look, we'll give you all this money if you change your zoning regulations. The problem is that zoning is often at the local level. So
correct.
The states often don't even have the power to force like towns to change their zoning. Right. And so
Well,
like
don't we have an example of something that Trump created? And I go back to thinking about the opportunity zones, right? Opportunity zones are something like this could be.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've got my own ideas about what they could potentially, do. That I mean, well, here's like one thing that I think they could do at the federal level, which, could help. Like, let's say, for instance, they say, hey, look, if you build housing and you keep the rents below, whatever it is,
X.
what
Yeah.
1/3 of the median income in the area, we will eliminate federal taxation on any profits coming from or give you a huge tax break, right?
Right.
I mean, that could have a big impact. There are things like along those lines where they could say to states like, hey, look, if you I think it would make a lot of sense if states were to say, and require municipalities to do this, like we will abate property taxes if you build affordable housing, right? And stop with all the complicated mandates of this percentage of blah blah blah. Like, just say to them straight up, like, it'll be a sliding scale from 0 to 100%. If your project is 100% affordable according to this metric, 100% of property taxes are gone. And like this, and if it's 50%, 50% are gone. And that would go a long way towards making more affordable housing without changing zoning at all, right? Because you're still building it where, multifamily is already zoned. You wouldn't even have to change zoning. And then the feds could kind of accelerate this process by saying like, hey, we'll replace those funds, right, with federal funds, like whatever you're losing in property taxes, we'll replace it, right? So I think there are things that they could do. I haven't heard any of these things discussed, but that's what, if I were in charge, like that's what I would be thinking. So
very, very cool. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate insights. It gives me a better picture of what's possible or potential. Where can people find you, Jonathan?
So you can follow me on LinkedIn, even though I'm on a digital detox until 2025. I'll be back in January. But feel free to connect with me there. Also, please go to school.com/AIC and join my program. This is going to be very soon. The price is going to go up dramatically. I'm changing the program a lot, but if you want to get grandfathered and get a lot of those benefits for a more expensive program, be sure to join in the next month before all these changes happen.
Awesome, Jonathan. Appreciate it. We'll talk next week.
Yep. See you then.